He said it over breakfast of all places. His voice calm, fork tapping the plate, eyes never meeting mine. That I owed him, he said. Owed him for raising me, for all the diapers, the sleepless nights, the bills. As if I'd been a debt, he regretted, not collecting on sooner. I remember staring at the toast in my hand, suddenly unable to swallow. That was the moment, I think. The moment a thread inside me snapped, not loud, not violent, but clean, quiet. It wasn't the first time he'd hinted at it, but it was the first time he said it outright. Like he'd finally given himself permission. Like I was no longer someone he had to pretend to love. I'm so glad you're here. Stay with me until the end. And tell me in the comments where you're watching from. I love seeing how far this story travels. I was 17 when I found out I was pregnant. I'd hidden the sickness, the swelling, the fear until I couldn't anymore. My own mother had been long gone by then, and the aunt who raised me was more porcelain than flesh by that point. My son came in the thick of summer, when the air itself felt heavy with judgment. I gave up school, gave up dreams I had never spoken, out loud, and gave everything I had, everything I was becoming to him. I worked nights at the diner, cleaned houses in the afternoon. I remember once standing on a ladder cleaning someone else's ceiling fan, feeling dizzy from hunger, wondering if he'd ever know what I gave. I used to whisper to him at night when he was asleep in the crib beside me. I told him I loved him more than anyone had ever loved me, and I meant it back then. Before his voice deepened, before mine softened too much to fight, there were signs. You'll always see them too late, don't you? It's the way he'd correct me at gatherings, the way he'd laugh just a second too long when someone teased me. It's the way his wife looked at me like I was something that had stayed past its expiration date. I told myself it was nothing, that I was being sensitive, that they were tired, busy, stressed, when my friends started drifting away. They all had reasons. I thought maybe I had become too much, too slow to reply, too scattered, too something. One friend called and said she'd come by soon, and never did. Another waved across the church parking lot, but turned the other way before reaching me. It wasn't sudden. It was like fog swallowing things piece by piece. They said I needed more rest. They meant I needed to stay out of the way. When I called and didn't get an answer, I told myself it was probably nothing. When my daughter-in-law began answering with cool, clipped words when she answered at Allie, thought maybe I'd offended her without realizing. I started second-guessing every sentence I spoke. I apologized more than I ever used to. The first real crack came from a grocery list. A piece of paper left out with a handwritten note about the additional groceries for Grandma until title. Change clears. It was the word until that stood out. Not if, not maybe. Just a quiet, certain countdown I hadn't known I was part of. I let the days pass, but I started listening more. Started checking the mail before anyone else could. And one morning, there it was. A letter from a law office addressed to him, but sent to my house. The subject line said, "Quit claim deed." That was the moment the air changed. I didn't open the envelope. I didn't need to. The title was in my name, the landmine. Had been for years. It was supposed to go to him one day, yes, but not like this. Not without my knowing. Not through silence and signatures made behind my back. I waited until they were gone for the weekend. I opened the desk drawer he thought I never used, and I found it another folder tucked beneath tax forms. Power of attorney. A plan I had never signed, but somehow existed in draft, ready to be filed. My name printed. My life reduced to an asset. That night, I sat on the back steps, blanket around my shoulders, staring at the stars that didn't blink. I cried for a long time, not loud, not shaking. It's just the kind of crying that seeps out of every part of you, like water from a cracked cup. Then I stopped, and in the silence that followed, something rose inside me. Not rage, not revenge, just clarity, cold and quiet and clean. A few days later, I asked him gently, asked why he didn't talk to me first, why he thought I wouldn't notice. He smiled like I was being dramatic. Said it was better this way, that it would all be simpler once everything was in his hands. He leaned across the kitchen island and said, "Mom, this is how it works when we take care of our elders. It's not charity. It's what you owe us." I said nothing in response. Just looked at the boy I once rocked to sleep. It's the boy who used to slip notes under my door saying he loved me more than peanut butter toast. It's the boy who now saw me as an entry in a ledger, a liability waiting to be signed away. So I called Margaret. She had been the one who took him in when I was too sick to stand. It's the one who brought him soup when I had double shifts and no childcare. She was the one he called Auntie Margaret even. Though we weren't blood, it's the one who walked him to school when I was scrubbing floors in another zip code. She'd never asked for anything, never claimed any part in raising him. But she had. She had more than anyone. The day I changed the will, the lawyer raised an eyebrow but said nothing. The land went to her. Quietly, legally, entirely. I didn't tell him. Not right away. Let life go on. Let him keep trying to work his plan. Until the day he came with new documents ready for my signature. He sat across the table with a coffee I hadn't made and a pen I didn't hand him. I told him it wasn't mine anymore. That the land belonged to the woman who had raised him while he was still soft enough to be saved. He didn't understand. At first, then his face changed only slightly but enough. He didn't raise his voice. He didn't have to. I had already heard everything I needed to hear. He left with the papers in his hand. Left the coffee on the table. Left me with the silence I had grown used to, only now it felt warm. It felt like air returning after a long time underground. I didn't sell the house. I didn't run away. I just stopped apologizing for staying. I walk the land sometimes, and I think of Margaret. I think of all the things we give in silence and how rarely they're repaid. But sometimes, if you wait long enough, you get to give back, not out of spite, but out of truth. There were good years once. I hold on to them like yellowing photographs, soft at the corners, a little faded, but real enough to make me ache. I remember the way his hand fit in mine when he was small, how he used to fall asleep with his head on my chest, breath shallow and warm, as if the world made sense there. We didn't have much. That's not just something people say, we really. Didn't we lived in a tour room apartment above a laundromat? And when the machines rumbled below us, the floor would hum. I used to sing lullabies over the shaking floorboards just so he wouldn't notice the cold creeping through the windows. I got him a tiny desk from a secondhand store and painted it sky blue. Told him it was where he could draw his dreams. I used it until his knees bumped the underside. There were nights I came home from work with my back screaming, legs aching and hands cracked from cleaning other people's kitchens. But when I heard his little voice say, "Mama," and his arms wrapped around my waist, it all went quiet. That's what motherhood was for me, quieting every storm with the sound of his breath near mine. When he turned 7, I baked him a cake from scratch. We couldn't afford presents that year, so I gave him a letter. I still remember what I wrote, that he was the best thing I ever did, that I would never stop showing up, even if the world tried to stop me. He folded the letter and kept it in a shoebox. I saw it once, years later, buried under action figures and broken crayons. His teenage years were hard, not because he was cruel, but because he started to pull away. It's like a tide receding. I would catch him staring at his shoes when I spoke, mumbling instead of laughing, walking ahead instead of beside me. I told myself it was just the age. Boys do that, don't they? They test their edges, their tempers. But sometimes I'd lie awake and wonder if I had loved him too hard, held him too close, smothered the space he needed to grow. I made mistakes. I know I did. There were days I shouted too loudly, cried too often, forgot things I should have remembered. There was a birthday I missed because of a shift I couldn't afford to lose. And there was that one Christmas we didn't even have a tree. I decorated a broomstick with tinsel and pretended it was funny. He smiled, but not with his eyes. Still, he never went hungry. Never went without clean clothes. Never missed a day. Of school, I kept the lights on, kept the refrigerator humming, kept the rent paid even when I was living on ramen and worry. And when college came, filled out every form I could find, researched scholarships until my fingers cramped. I co-signed the loans, took on another job, and told him he'd never have to worry about where he came from. That he could make something new, something better. I was so proud when he graduated. I sat in the back row of the auditorium because the closer seats were already full. I wore a dress I hadn't worn in 10 years, fixed my hair with trembling hands, and clapped until my palms ached. Afterward, he hugged me, said thank you, said he couldn't have done it without me. And for a moment, I believed we were still the same mother and son, standing on the edge of the life we had built together. But life after that grew quiet. He visited less, called in short bursts. He married a girl who barely looked at me. At first, I thought it was nerves. Then I thought it was dislike. Eventually, I realized it was disregard, so I wasn't a part of. Their world, just a shadow at the corner of the room, smiled at politely, dismissed gently. I still sent birthday cards, still baked his favorite banana bread on holidays, even when they didn't come by. I'd wrap it in foil and wait. Sometimes I'd eat it myself 2 days later, pretending I'd just made it for the freezer. I learned not to ask for time, to expect calls. I learned to keep my voice cheerful and short. Don't take up too much space. Don't talk too long. Don't be disappointed when plans change. But inside me, a silence was blooming. The kind that grows when love is not returned, only tolerated. It wasn't just about being forgotten. That happens to people sometimes. We fade into the background of others' lives. But it was more than that. Was the way they looked through me, not at me. The way my stories went unanswered. The way my presence seemed to inconvenience them. I was no longer the woman who had built a life out of nothing. I was just the woman who sat on the porch waiting for visits that didn't come, for thank yous that stopped arriving, for a son who now spoke to me like I was a bank teller or a nurse once. I told him a memory, how he used to help me sweep the kitchen after dinner, dragging the broom like it weighed more than him. He blinked and said he didn't remember. Then he laughed and said maybe that was my memory, not his. It was said lightly. But it stung. That was the beginning of something small but certain inside me unraveling. I wasn't imagining things. I wasn't confused. I had lived it. I had held that broom with him. I had burned dinners and sung lullabies and sat by hospital beds. I had loved him in 1,000 ways, 1,000 days. And now I was being erased, not cruelly, not violently, just quietly. One polite conversation at a time, one missed holiday at a time, one softened memory at a time, and I let it happen. It happened for longer than I want to admit, because when you spend your whole life proving your worth through love, it's hard to understand when love no longer proves your worth. But oh, see it now. I see all of it, and I remember. Every broom, every bruise, every breath, no matter who else forgets. I don't. The first time I felt it wasn't anything grand. It was just a Tuesday. A quiet, gray-skied kind of day, where even the birds seemed too tired to sing. I had made soup, the kind he used to love. Carrots, celery, garlic, crushed with the side of the knife the way he liked. I made extra, wrapped it in 2 containers, and drove it over without calling ahead. The driveway was full, her car, his car. A delivery van pulled to the side. There were voices inside, faint laughter, something playing on the television. I stood at the door holding those containers, steam warming the inside of the plastic lids. And I rang the bell once, twice. I heard her say something, then the baby crying, and then nothing. No footsteps, no greeting. It's just the sound of my heartbeat in my ears. I waited a full 2 minutes, then quietly left the containers on the mat. I used to bring flowers, little bunches from the market when I had the energy. Once I brought a rosemary plant in a clay pot because she'd said she liked the smell. I never saw it again. That night he called and thanked me, said the soup was good, but something in his voice felt off. like he was distracted or maybe reading something while talking. I asked how they were doing. He said fine. I asked about the baby. He said she was sleeping more now. Then he said they were just sitting down to dinner, so he had to go. We hadn't spoken more than 4 minutes, and that's when it began, not the loss itself, but the awareness of it, the peeling back of a thin, false comfort. Another day, I was at the pharmacy. I picked up my blood pressure medicine, same as always, and the woman behind the counter smiled too tightly. She asked if I wanted to use the card on file, but when? I said yes. She paused. Said the name wasn't mine. I thought maybe it was a mistake, but it wasn't. My son had put his name on my prescriptions, said it was to simplify things, in case I ever needed help. I hadn't asked for that dot, and from then on, when I called to refill, they asked if I was authorized. I stopped answering. I went in person instead. I didn't want to be managed. That same week, I tried to schedule my own appointment with my doctor and was told the online portal had been changed. I no longer had access. I asked him about it, casually, trying not to sound accusatory. He said he'd just updated things to make it easier, said I didn't need to worry about those technical things anymore, that it was all handled. Handled. That was the word that stuck, as if I were a piece of paperwork. A chore, a check mark. I started noticing other things. They bought new chairs for the dining room, sleek, modern ones. I was used to the older set, the ones with arms I could lean on to help myself up. The new ones had no arms, no grip. The first time I sat down, I struggled to get up. No one reached for me. She looked at me once with a smile too wide, told me how proud they were of me for staying active. How not many people my age were still so independent. I don't think she meant to sound condescending, but she did. I laughed lightly, nodded, said I was doing my best, but I drove home that night and sat in the car longer than usual. Hands on the wheel, headlights off, just breathing in the dark. Another time I offered to babysit. They hesitated. Said the baby had a new routine, that it was easier for her own mother to come over. That maybe next time there was never a next time. I asked if I could bring the baby a blanket I'd crocheted. Pale yellow, soft. I'd worked on it for weeks, slow and steady, fingers aching but proud. She said of course, but the next time I visited, it wasn't in the crib. I didn't ask. Somewhere in the quiet, something inside me began to fray. I started to forget things. Not big things, not names or dates, but little details. What I came into the room for, where I'd set the keys. And suddenly that became a topic. She'd mention it in passing, how forgetful I'd become. He'd joke that maybe it was time to set reminders. Once, I heard her talking to someone on the phone and she said, laughing, that they were keeping an eye on Mom. Keeping an eye on me as if I were drifting, as if I couldn't see clearly anymore. But I could. I saw all of it. The way she took over my medication reminders. The way he filled out my forms. It's the way they suggested I stop driving at night. Then subtly took my keys from the bowl and didn't return them. It wasn't cruel. It wasn't even obvious. It was just small acts of silencing, of removing, of deciding. At church, I stopped going. Not because I didn't believe anymore, but because I couldn't bear sitting in that pew. Alone, hearing other women talk about their grandchildren and Sunday dinners and family vacations. I had nothing to offer. No stories, no visits, no voice in those circles. Asterisk, once I bumped into a friend at the post office, Marilyn. We used to knit together. She asked how things were. I opened my mouth and nothing came out. It's just a smile that didn't fit right. That night, I sat by my front window with a blanket on my knees and stared at the streetlight. It flickered, then steadied, then flickered again. Thought, that's what I feel like. A light someone forgot to change. Still burning, but only barely. Still useful, but not seen. That was when I realized they weren't forgetting me. They were removing me. Quietly, strategically, piece by piece. And the scariest part, it was working. I stopped calling after the third time in a row she said they were too busy to talk. Each time, her voice got smoother, more polished, like someone trained to de-escalate a complaint. She'd say they were juggling nap times and early meetings, or that my son was in the shower, or out getting groceries, or just stepping into a Zoom call. I started to feel like a telemarketer in my own child's life, always inconvenient, always misplaced. I waited for him to call me back. He, DIDN, single quotes. Then one Sunday, I sat with the phone on the kitchen table. I watched the sun slip across the window pane while the soup simmered on the stove. I kept checking the screen, certain I'd missed the vibration, certain that this would be the day the silence broke. But it didn't. And as the light faded into evening, finally turned the phone over so I wouldn't have to see it not light up. People think isolation happens in one sharp moment. It's like something snaps and suddenly you're alone. But it doesn't happen that way. It's gradual. Starts in missed calls and unreturned texts. In the sound of your own voice getting softer because you're not sure if anyone is still listening. The house got too quiet. I stopped turning on the TV in the evenings. The noise felt like lying. I preferred the truth of silence. I started spending more time in the garden, even when there was nothing to weed or water. Sit with my hands in my lap, staring at the hydrangeas as if they might answer something I hadn't yet figured out how to ask. One afternoon, a neighbor walked past while I was out front. We used to talk more back when I had the energy to care about front porch politics and which postman was reliable. She waved politely, but didn't slow down. That's when it hit me. Somewhere along the way, I had shifted from part of the neighborhood to the woman who lives alone. A fixture, not a friend. Someone to nod at, not speak with. The invitations stopped coming, too. There was a time when I'd get a flyer or a call about book club or the church supper or a knitting circle at the community center. But now the women who used to remind me had stopped reminding. And I hadn't realized how much I'd relied on being asked. Not just for the company, but for the affirmation. It's the proof that I still had a place. One Sunday, I walked to church. By myself. I wore my good blouse and the shoes that pinch my toes, just to feel like I still had reason to dress for someone other than myself. During the service, the pew behind me was full of families. Babies fussed, children kicked their feet, adults passed mints and hymn books like rituals. I sat alone, no hand to hold. No whisper beside me, just space, hollow and vast. Afterward, I stood near the entrance, hoping to run into someone I used to talk to. One of the ladies I used to drive to potlucks or sit next to during bingo nights. But most of them walked past me with distracted smiles. One even mistook me for someone else. I corrected her gently. She apologized, laughed awkwardly, and disappeared. Into the crowd I went home that day and didn't leave the house for almost a week. When I told my son that church felt a little too much these days, he said that was probably wise. He said rest was important at my age. That maybe I should lean into hobbies, take naps, enjoy retirement. Retirement. He said it like I was on some permanent vacation. As if I hadn't spent the last 40 years trading sleep for survival. As if I hadn't bartered my body for mortgage payments, groceries, school fees. He said rest, and I heard irrelevant. A few days later, I got a group message from her. A link to an article titled Signs of Cognitive Decline in Aging Parents. No message, just the link. I stared at it for a long time, wondering if she meant to send it to someone else, wondering if it was some sort of mistake. But I knew it wasn't. It was deliberate. It was meant for me, an unspoken accusation cloaked as concern. I didn't respond. I just pressed and held my finger on the message until the phone offered the option to delete it. I started to question everything after that. I started wondering whether I'd forgotten too much, spoken too vaguely, misplaced one too many things. It wasn't just their silent sit, was the way they started to make me doubt my own voice. I would walk into rooms and forget why I would tell a story and halfway through realize they were no longer listening. She would nod and smile, and then say something like, "You already told us that, remember?" I began writing things down. Grocery lists, thoughts, bits of conversations. Just to see if I could trace the truth of myself. just to prove I was still here. They said they were checking in more often. But what they meant was monitoring. Surveillance disguised as care. She'd text and ask if I'd taken my pills. He'd drop by unannounced, glance at the stovetop to see if I'd left it on, peek at the mail pile as if expecting unpaid bills or foreclosure notices. I hadn't asked for help. I hadn't asked for pity. What I wanted was connection. What I got was containment. I heard her on the phone once, behind the closed door of their home office while I was in the guest room watching their baby sleep. She was speaking in that hushed, managerial tone she uses when she's trying to sound both sympathetic and in control. She said something like, "We're trying to do what's best for her, even if she resists. She's starting to need more structure. She doesn't realize it. But she's not as sharp anymore. Structure, sharp, need." I sat on the edge of the guest bed with my hands folded. The baby stirred beside me. I felt something I hadn't felt in years. Shame, not because I had failed, but because I had let them convince me I might have. And that kind of shame sticks. It wraps around the spine and settles in your bones like a long, slow ache. I started dreaming of smaller places, studio apartments with windows that faced sunrise, homes where no one hovered, no one questioned, no one rewrote my memories into medical symptoms. I imagined a porch where I could drink tea in peace, a table set for one. A world without watchers. It was the first time I realized I didn't just feel lonely. I had been made alone, on purpose. And I wasn't going to wait for permission to undo that. It was a Saturday when I found the envelope. Ordinary enough. I had gone over to drop off a package that had been mistakenly delivered to my address, a catalog with their R name on it, glossy and thick, promising new furniture and seasonal rugs. I let myself in through the back door like I used to, the one that creaks unless you push it just so. I called out, but no one answered. She had taken the baby to her sister's for the weekend. And he'd mentioned something about a golf game with friends. I don't remember why I didn't just leave the package on the counter and go. Maybe it was habit. Maybe it was curiosity. Maybe I had started to understand, on some unspoken level, that not everything was what it seemed. There was a small stack of mail sitting by the fruit bowl, unopened. I wasn't snooping, not at first. I just moved it aside so I wouldn't accidentally spill water on it when I set down the glass I'd poured. But then I saw it. The envelope. My name on the front. Not hers. Not his. Mine. The return address was a law office, one I didn't recognize. No stamp. Hand-delivered? Maybe. I turned it over slowly. My fingers had started to tremble. There was no seal. Just a flap tucked in, like it had been read already. Inside a letter, 2 pages. Top said, "Notice of petition to appoint temporary conservator." I stared at it for a full minute before I could even breathe. It named me, listed me as potentially unable to manage financial or personal affairs due to signs of diminished mental capacity. It cited concern from close family members and recommended an initial evaluation period pending further legal confirmation. The request was unsigned, a draft, a beginning. I set the letter down like it might burn through the table. My hands went cold. I looked around the kitchen, the one I had cooked in, babysat in, stood in for birthday toasts and holiday toasts, and everyday toasts. And I felt like a stranger. They were planning something, not guessing, not wondering. Planning. I don't know how long I stood there. Maybe 10 minutes, maybe more. The refrigerator hummed. A clock ticked faintly in the next room. Everything looked normal: cereal boxes above the fridge, a child's crayon drawing on the side of the dishwasher, a sweater draped over the back of a chair. But I saw it all differently now. I saw it as the setting of a story I didn't know I was in. A story being written without my consent, and suddenly moments started fitting together like puzzle pieces. I hadn't realized belonged to the same picture. The way she'd casually asked for copies of my medical records after my checkup. The time he offered to help with my property taxes and asked for my login info. The way she insisted I start using her address for some of my mail, said it would be easier with their shared services. I had called it helpfulness, but now I saw the shape of it. I don't know, it was something else, control, not out of cruelty maybe, but certainly not out of love. I took the letter with me when I left, slipped it into my coat pocket like contraband. My heart pounded the whole ride home. I turned off the radio, drove the long way. Every streetlight felt too bright. Every glance from another driver felt like they could see through me, like they could sense the unraveling. When I got home, sat at the kitchen table and read it again, carefully this time. I underlined the phrases that made my stomach turn, in the interest of her safety. To prevent potential mismanagement of resources. Gradual cognitive decline suspected by family observers. Observers. Like I was a specimen. I remembered something then, a conversation from a few months ago. We had been out at dinner. I had paid, like I often did, and he joked that I shouldn't spend too much. That I needed to be responsible with the inheritance. At the time, I laughed. I thought he was trying to protect me, but maybe he was. Protecting something else, it's strange how quickly you can start doubting your own memory when others want you to. You question things that were once solid. Did I say that? Did I forget that? Did I miss something obvious? But the letter grounded me, anchored me. It was in their words now, not mine. It's not a misunderstanding. A plan. I went to my desk drawer and pulled out my old files. Bank statements, deed papers, my will. I hadn't looked at most of them in years. The ink had faded in places, but everything was still mine, still in my name, still under my control for now. That night, I didn't sleep. I lay in bed watching the shadows shift across the ceiling. I thought about all the times I had trusted their voices over my own instincts, all the times I had given benefit of the doubt. I thought about how the biggest betrayals don't come from strangers. They come from the ones who once reached for your hand in the dark. The next morning, I made tea, sat with the letter again, and I said out loud to the empty kitchen, "I'm not crazy." I said it softly, but with certainty. Like a woman declaring herself real, I'm not forgetful, not broken. I'm not lost. They want to pretend I'm drifting, but I'm not. I'm wide awake now, and I'm not going to let them sign me away. Not without a voice, not without a fight. The following week, I began keeping a notebook. Not for memories or lists, or even thoughts, but for proof. A simple, lined, spiral-bound notebook I bought from the corner shop near the pharmacy. The kind with a flimsy plastic cover that bends if you press too hard. I wrote the date at the top of the first page, then started logging things. Times of phone calls, words they said. Letters that arrived. My own clarity recorded in black ink. Because I knew what they were building now. A case, not a conversation. I wasn't going to give them silence to work with. I went back through my files again, this time slower. There had been a bank account I rarely used, one I had opened years ago with small savings from odd jobs. I had left it alone after retirement, letting it sit as a kind of emergency fund. When I checked the statements, something caught my eye. A withdrawal for $4,000 from 6 months ago. I hadn't made that withdrawal. I printed the statement and circled the transaction. I called the bank. The woman on the line was polite but distant. She said the account was now associated with a shared management authorization. She named my son, said he had been added as an account manager. I asked when. She paused, said she couldn't give me more detail without verification from both parties. I hung up without yelling, sat in the kitchen with the statement spread before me, and I felt it again, that quiet type of fury. The kind that doesn't scream or rage, the kind that sits still and burns slow. He hadn't told me, hadn't asked. Just slid his name into my finances like a foot through a closing door. The next day I opened my mail with a letter opener instead of my hands. Not because it was easier, but because it made me feel precise. I found another envelope from an insurance provider I hadn't used in over a year. Inside was a policy notice, updated contact on file. His name again. I began to wonder how many of my things were no longer mine. I made a list in the notebook. Check all accounts. Review will get copy of deeds, scheduled doctor's appointment myself. Find old power of attorney. Papers, look into legal advice. The next day, I walked to the public library. It was a place no one would follow me, no one would second guess me. I sat at a computer, logged in as a guest, and began reading. Legal conservatorships, elder financial abuse, rights and responsibilities. The words felt heavy, bureaucratic, but clear. It's clearer than the way they'd been speaking to me for months. All the vague kindness, the soft condescension, the "we're just trying to help." Help. It had become a code word. It's a way to handle me, not to hear me. I called a local legal aid office, told the woman on the phone I had a few questions. She offered me a 30-minute consultation with someone named Mr. Rayburn, an attorney who specialized in elder law. I took it 3 days later. I sat in a beige office that smelled like old paper and lemon disinfectant. Mr. Rayburn was younger than I expected, maybe in his 40s, with a tidy haircut and eyes that stayed on mine when I spoke. I told him the truth, not all at once, but in pieces, as if laying out a puzzle I needed someone else to help me see. He didn't interrupt, just nodded, asked the right questions, took notes on a yellow pad. Then, at the end, he looked at me and said something I won't forget. He said, "You're not imagining any of this? You still have options." I felt my lungs expand again. He asked if I had the will, the deed, the account paperwork. I told him I did. He asked if I remembered the last time I legally signed anything with my son or daughter-in-law. I told him the truth, not in years. Not since I updated the will after my sister died. He asked if I felt safe. I told him I did, but that I didn't feel seen. And he understood that distinction. He gave me a card, told me to send him copies of the documents, said it would help to have a paper trail. I left the office feeling like someone had slid a stone into my palm, not heavy, but solid, something I could hold on to. That night, I didn't cry. I didn't panic. I didn't pace the hall or write frantic letters. I sat with the notebook in my lap, rereading what I'd logged. My own handwriting looked stronger than I remembered, confident, even underlined in places. I wrote at the bottom of the page, "You're still here. You're still thinking clearly. If you're not done yet." I called my doctor's office the next morning and scheduled an appointment directly. No third party. I told them I needed a full wellness exam, including cognitive screening. Not because I was worried, but because I wanted it on paper. My doctor, bless her, didn't question me. She had known me for years. She said she was happy to do the evaluation, that it would be good to have for my own records. She knew, even without asking, that I needed evidence in the days that followed. I started speaking less to them, not because I was angry, but because I wanted the silence for myself. To think, to build something that could not be undone with another signature forged in care. They noticed he called twice in 1 week. She sent over a meal, some sort of quinoa dish I never asked for, wrapped in eco-friendly plastic with a note that said, "Thought you could use a break." I left it on the porch overnight. I wasn't hungry for their gestures. Anymore, what I was hungry for was clarity, and now I had the appetite to get it. I didn't expect to find anything that day. I was only looking for my winter scarves. They were always tucked away in the cedar chest at the foot of my bed, folded neatly beside gloves that didn't match and a hat I hadn't worn in years. But as I lifted the lid and pushed aside the soft wool layers, my hand brushed a folder I didn't recognize. It was navy blue, unmarked, slim. I opened it, expecting to find old bills or receipts I'd forgotten to shred. But instead, it held 5 pages of neatly printed documents, legal ones. 2 were bank forms. One was titled Durable Power of Attorney. The last was a drafted living will, unsigned. My name was everywhere. So was his, my son. The dates were recent. Too recent? The kind of recent that made your skin prickle and your stomach flip. I scanned line after line, and my breath began to shift. Not faster, not heavier, just shallower, like my body was trying to make itself smaller. The durable power of attorney granted him complete control in the event I became unable to manage my own affairs. But here was the twist. There was a medical note attached, single page from a wellness visit I vaguely remembered from a few months ago. It said, patient presented with signs of short-term memory decline. Mild disorientation noted. Disorientation.it. Hit like a slap. I remember that appointment. I'd had a cold that week, and I'd gotten flustered when the nurse asked for my insurance card. My purse had a tear in the lining, and I couldn't find it right away. I laughed it off, but they must have written it down. Or worse, interpreted it as confusion. I hadn't thought much of it, till now, that note taken out of context. Was stapled to a document that handed over my whole life. He hadn't told me, not a word, not a conversation, not a question, just quiet maneuvering behind my back, using my own body, my own moment of weakness as a wedge to pry open the door of control. I sat back on the bed and held the papers in my lap. The room felt dim even with the lights on. The walls so familiar felt suddenly unfamiliar. I looked at the bookshelf, the framed picture of him as a boy. I saw 100 Sundays flash through my mind, cooking his favorite meals, folding his laundry, walking him to the bus stop when his backpack was too heavy. I saw myself holding him at the hospital when he had the flu, brushing his hair back while he slept. And now here was my name, reduced to a signature line, a space to be filled when the time came. I called Mr. Rayburn immediately, told him what I'd found. He didn't sound surprised, just calm, steady. The way people sound when they've heard the same story 100 different ways with 100 different names. He told me to bring the papers in. And more than that, to request a copy of my medical records from that appointment. Not the summary, the full chart. I drove over the next morning with the folder in my tote bag pressed between a book and my umbrella. The sky was overcast and smelled like rain, and I remember thinking, strangely, that it matched the ache in my chest, a low-pressure kind of grief. Not storming, just heavy. When I handed the documents to Mr. Rayburn, he read them quietly. Then he nodded. They were building a case, he said. I asked him what we could do. His voice softened. First, we get everything in writing. You document your awareness. You reaffirm your rights. And we begin drawing new lines that they can't step over without stepping into legal fire. It felt like placing bricks, one by one. Building something I thought I'd never need a wall between me and the boy I once carried. I requested the full medical chart. It came 3 days later in a manila envelope that I opened with trembling fingers. The note was there, the mention of confusion, the observed forgetfulness. But there was no official diagnosis, nothing permanent. Nothing that justified the kind of documents they had started to draft. Just a comment, casually written. But they had clung to it like gospel, like permission. It had been enough to start pulling strings behind closed doors. Enough to sit in a lawyer's office and discuss my life without inviting me into the room. And that's when the second discovery came. Tucked inside one of the bank forms, a line I hadn't noticed before. A change of beneficiary. The primary listed name was no longer mine. It was his. For a savings account I hadn't even remembered setting up back in 2002. I had opened it with the last of my second job paychecks. I used to call it my quiet fund. The money for repairs, travel, a new water heater when the old one finally quit. It wasn't much now, but it had been mine. Had I felt my jaw tighten? Not in anger, but in resolve. 'Cause something had changed in me since I found that first envelope. I was no longer afraid of being wrong. I was afraid of staying quiet. I made copies of everything, sent them to Mr. Rayburn, logged the details in my notebook, date stamped and underlined, and then I stood at the mirror in my hallway and looked at myself. Really looked. My cheeks are softer now. My eyes not as sharp around the edges. But behind them, I saw everything clearly. I wasn't fading. I was being buried alive under the weight of their assumptions, their ambitions, their plans drawn without my name at the table. But I was still here, and I had the papers now, and I was going to make sure I couldn't take anything else from me. Not without facing the full truth of who I still was. I didn't sleep that night, not really. I lay still with the window cracked, just enough to let the night air in. It was cool and smelled like wet pavement and fading jasmine. The streetlight outside blinked softly against the wall, and I listened to the sound of my own breath, steady and slow. My body was calm, but something inside me was shifting, not sharp, not sudden, but quiet and undeniable. It wasn't rage. I had felt flashes of that early on when I found the draft petition. When I read the note from the doctor, when I realized how many decisions had been made without me. But this was different. This was something colder, something cleaner. Clarity. I had spent so many years holding my tongue, softening my truth to keep the peace. I had excused things, explained them away, made allowances for their busyness, their distance, their gentle erasure of me. I had told myself that motherhood required patience, that getting older meant stepping back, giving space, being small. But now I saw what that patience had bought me. I saw what silence had cost, and I couldn't be that woman anymore. In the morning, I stood at the bathroom sink and looked at myself again. Not like before. Not to check my wrinkles or adjust my collar. I looked deeper. I thought of the girl I used to be, 17, terrified, holding a tiny baby in my arms with no plan and no map. I remembered how strong I had to be then. And I thought, if I could survive that, I could survive this too. I ran a comb through my hair, made tea, sat at the kitchen table, and began writing a letter. Not to them, not yet. It's to myself. You are not losing your mind. You are not difficult. You are not broken. You are not in decline. You are waking up. After I signed it, I folded the paper and placed it inside the notebook where I kept everything else, my records, my notes, my timeline. It was becoming more than just a log now. It was my truth, bound in paper. I called Mr. Rayburn again, told him I wanted to draft a legal letter, something that made clear I was not in need of guardianship or outside control, something that drew a line in ink. He said he'd help me draft it. I could hear the quiet respect in his voice now. Not pity, not worry, respect. That afternoon, I cleaned the house. Not out of nervousness, but out of a need to reclaim my space. I opened every window, let the wind move through the curtains. I dusted the picture frames, even the ones I hadn't touched in years. One of them caught me. It was a photo of my son and me at his high school graduation. He had one arm slung casually around my shoulder, and I remember how I beamed with pride that day. In the photo, he's smiling. But now all I could see was the space between us, the way he leaned out just slightly, the way I leaned in too much. I set the photo down and turned it face down on the shelf. That night, I took a bath. Hadn't in a long while usually. Too much effort, easier to just shower and move on. But I needed something slow, something still. I lit the lavender candle I'd been saving and watched the flame flicker in the tile's reflection. I let the heat soak into my bones, into the ache I hadn't let myself feel, and that's when I cried. Not the angry kind. Not the bitter, shaking kind. This was grief. For the years I lost, the love I gave that was no longer returned. For the version of my son that I still carried in my heart, the little boy with skinned knees and chocolate on his chin. The boy who used to leave drawings under my pillow. That boy was gone. What remained was a man who saw me not as a person, but as a task to be handled, a burden to manage. I let the tears fall into the water, silent and warm. I didn't wipe them away. When I finally rose from the bath, I felt lighter. Not healed, but more whole. Because I wasn't hiding from the truth anymore. I was walking directly into it. In the days that followed, I began preparing. I gathered every document, created digital backups, took the notebook and photocopied every page, every note, every timestamp. I labeled folders and stored them in two places. One in the kitchen, one in a safe deposit box I hadn't touched since the year my sister died. I wrote a new letter to my doctor, requesting the original note from the disorientation visit be amended. I attached a statement explaining the context. Mr. Rayburn reviewed it for me, line by line. He said it was clear, professional, and firm. That was all I needed. I also began drafting something else, a new will, one that no longer passed everything on to him, one that accounted for the people who had stood beside me when things were quiet and hard and unseen. I called Margaret. She'd been a constant in the background, the woman who once brought soup when I was sick, who picked up my son from school when I couldn't. I told her I was thinking of changing things. She didn't ask for details. She just said, softly, "It's your life. You get to choose." And I did. For the first time in a long time, I felt like I had a say. The shift in me wasn't loud. I didn't storm out of rooms. I didn't send angry texts. But I stopped shrinking when they called. I didn't rush to answer. When she texted, I replied when I felt like it. I stopped explaining myself. I stopped accepting the smallest crumbs of kindness like they were feasts. I made myself a warm lunch every day and set the table for one, not with sadness, with care. A linen napkin, a good fork, a nice plate, because I was done waiting to be seen. I was already here and I would not be erased. I didn't plan the conversation. It wasn't some grand moment. No speech, no dramatic silence before the truth landed. It came the way most real things do, gently. Then suddenly, it was a Sunday afternoon. He and his wife stopped by unexpectedly, said they were in the neighborhood and thought they'd check on me. I could tell from the way she kept glancing at her watch that they hadn't planned to stay long. She brought a salad in a plastic container, the kind you buy pre-mixed from the grocery store. He handed me a smile that didn't quite reach his eyes. We sat in the living room, the same room where I used to read him bedtime stories when he couldn't fall asleep, when he needed the soft rhythm of my voice to feel safe. Now, he sat across from me like someone about to offer advice to a stranger. She was the first to speak, of course. She asked if I'd thought any more about downsizing. Said there was a new development outside of town that had senior-friendly cottages with low maintenance where I wouldn't have to worry about yard work or bills or things getting away from me. Getting away from me. I let the words settle in the space between us. I noticed how her tone was still sugar-sweet. How? Her lips curled into the kind of smile that was too practiced to be kind. He nodded like he'd already decided on my behalf, said it would be easier all around. Then he added, as if it were a footnote, that they had been speaking to a financial advisor. That consolidating assets mine might make future planning smoother. For everyone. For everyone. I looked down at my hands resting in my lap. My fingers were still strong, my nails clean and trimmed. Hands that had washed him, fed him, held him through nights of fever and failure and heartbreak. Hands that had built a home out of barely enough, and now those hands were apparently the problem. Too slow, too old, too unsteady to manage what I'd built. So I folded them gently, looked up, and I spoke. I said I knew about the letter, the draft petition, the notes filed under my name, the conversations behind doors I hadn't been invited to. He blinked once. She froze. I told them I had spoken to an attorney, that I had gathered every document, that I had taken steps to ensure that nothing about my life or my future could be moved without my consent. I kept my voice steady, not cold, not angry, just steady, like water rising. He started to interrupt, said something about misunderstanding, about concern, about how they only wanted what was best for me. I didn't let him finish. I told him I was not confused. I was not declining. I was not some empty chair to be moved to the side of the room. I reminded him softly, because the sharpness wasn't necessary, that I had raised him alone. That I had kept the roof over his head when I had nothing but my own 2 hands, and borrowed faith. Then I had worked 3 jobs so he could sit in the classrooms he now used to explain why I wasn't capable anymore. He looked away. She said I was being sensitive. I said, no. I was being exact. Then I stood. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't ask them to leave, but I said, simply, you have mistaken my quiet for weakness. And then I walked into the kitchen, poured myself a glass of water, and drank it slowly, while they sat on the couch in the silence they had created. Eventually, they left no hugs, no promises to call soon. Just a tight thank you and the sound of the front door closing behind them. Afterward, I stood in the hallway. The house felt still, but not empty. It felt honest. I could feel the truth vibrating in the walls. It's no longer hidden beneath politeness and old stories. I went to the dining room and opened the drawer with the family albums. I hadn't looked at them in a long time. Flipping through the pages, I found the photo of his first Christmas. He was wrapped in a knitted blanket my sister had made. His cheeks were round, his eyes bright. His tiny fist clenched around my pinky. I touched the image with the tip of my finger. I didn't cry. I had cried enough. What I felt was something else. Something steadier. Relief. Because now everything was in the open. No more wondering if I was imagining it. No more second-guessing my instincts. No more twisting myself into someone smaller, just to fit the role they had written for me. They wanted me to believe I was fading, but all I had done was dim my own light out of love. Now, I was turning it back on. That evening, went out to the porch and watched the sky change. The clouds shifted from cream to gold to bruised lavender. The air smelled like dry leaves and the neighbor's jasmine. I sat in the wooden rocker with a blanket over my knees, notebook by my side, and a new kind of stillness in my chest, the kind that follows truth. I wrote one sentence at the top of the next page. I am not who they say I am. Then I underlined it and, I let the page stay open, because from now on, I was writing every part of my life myself. No one else would hold the pen. A few days after the confrontation, the calls stopped. No check-ins, no follow-up messages. No dropped-off meals in compostable containers. It's just silence. Not the kind that heals, but the kind that echoes. The kind they hope will make you come crawling back, softer, more pliable. But I didn't bend this time. I let the silence do what it needed to do. I had spent too long speaking gently into closed doors. Instead, I picked up the phone and called Margaret. She answered on the second ring with that voice of hers, warm and steady, like honey stirred into tea. I hadn't told her everything yet, only bits. Hints dropped between lines about weather and doctor visits. But this time, I told her the truth. She didn't interrupt, didn't try to rush to a solution. She just listened the way people do when they've lived through their own quiet heartbreaks. When I finished, there was a pause. Then she said softly, "That's not care. That's control dressed up in worry." She offered to come by that afternoon. She brought a peach cobbler and an ad. Old photo album I hadn't seen in years. The one from the summer we took the kids to the lake, before everything got complicated. We sat on the back porch, the late sun warming our knees, flipping pages of old laughter and bathing suits that didn't quite fit. She asked if I had legal help. I told her about Mr. Rayburn. She nodded, impressed. Then she asked if I had anyone else, someone to witness, someone to stand beside me if it came to that. I said I wasn't sure who I could ask. She reached across the table and tapped my notebook gently. "You've already done the hardest part," she said. "You believed yourself." The next day she came back, this time with her friend Ruth, who used to be a paralegal before retirement. Ruth had a way of reading documents, like they were novels, pointing out every clause and conditional phrase with an eyebrow arched just so. I showed her the draft conservatorship, the bank statements, the updated will I had started with Mr. Rayburn. She flipped through each page, nodding, murmuring under her breath. When she finished, she looked up and said, "They've laid a foundation, but you've built the structure now." It was the first time I felt protected. I didn't stop there. I called Joan. The woman who runs the front desk at my doctor's office. We've known each other for 20 years, ever since she handed me my first lab slip with a wink and a stick of gum. I asked if she could add a note to my file, something confirming I had requested a full cognitive evaluation and had passed it. She didn't hesitate, said she'd take care of it, then asked if I wanted to grab lunch next week. I smiled, said I'd love that. Even the librarian, Nancy, got involved in her own way. I'd been visiting the library more often, and she started setting aside articles and books for me. She'd print off things from elder rights websites, slip them between novels. She never said much, but once, when she handed me a folder, she touched my wrist and said, "We see more than you think." I began to understand something. There are quiet armies all around us if we know where to look. Women who've had their voices dismissed. People who've learned to read between the lines. Allies hidden in plain sight, just waiting for a reason to stand beside someone who's finally decided. To stand up, I wrote a letter, just 1 page. Not legal, not dramatic, just clear. It said, "To anyone who reads this, I am of sound mind and body. I am not confused, nor am I incapable. I am paying attention now. And I will no longer be removed from my own life." I signed it with the date. Made 3 copies. 1 I gave to Mr. Rayburn. 1 I put in my file at home. The last I folded and tucked inside the family Bible my mother left me. Not for any religious reason, just because it felt like the safest place I knew. A week later, Mr. Rayburn called. He had filed a formal notice with the county, a declaration of retained legal autonomy. Just a protective step, he said. Signal a boundary in black and white. I thanked him. He said, "You've done all the work." I just made it louder, and still, they didn't call. Until they did, it was her voice this time, my daughter-in-law, polite but brittle. She said they were concerned about the changes I was making, that I seemed influenced, that they just wanted to be sure I was okay. I told her I was more than okay. I told her I had never been more awake. She tried to soften then, said they loved me. That all of this had come from a place of care. I said love without trust is not love. It's ownership. She didn't know what to say to that. I didn't fill the silence after the call. I sat on the porch again, the sun warming the back of my neck. And I thought about all the ways I had shrunk myself over the years, in rooms, in conversations, in the story of my own life. Not anymore. Now I had names, I had papers. I had voices beside mine. I had proof. And more than that, I had people. Not many, but enough to remind me that the truth doesn't need a crowd. It just needs to be told. And now it finally was. The day the meeting happened, the sky was pale and cloudless, the kind that looks peaceful but holds no warmth. I wore my soft gray sweater and brought 2 folders in my bag, one with legal documents, the other with notes and printouts I'd gathered like breadcrumbs along a long, quiet trail. I had written my name in ink on the top of each one, out of formality, just to remind them who it all belonged to. They had asked to meet at the lawyer's office, Mr. Rayburn's. I think they expected to be the ones in control, to finally address the confusion as she had put it over the phone. But this time I wasn't coming to be explained to. I was coming to be heard. I arrived 10 minutes early. Margaret offered to come, but I told her I needed to do this part alone. Mr. Rayburn had already laid out water and tissues, though I wouldn't need the tissues. I'd done my crying. Now I was something steadier, something sharper, still soft, but no longer unarmed. They came in together, my son and his wife, dressed like it was Sunday brunch at a country club. She wore her usual polite smile, the one that never reached her eyes, and he avoided mine entirely. Mr. Rayburn stood and welcomed them calmly. He gestured to the chairs opposite mine and waited for silence before speaking. He began simply. He explained that I had asked him to clarify my current legal standing, that I was of sound mind, in full possession of my rights, and that I had requested the review and filing of a declaration affirming my autonomy. He used quiet, careful words, but every one of them was firm. They didn't interrupt. Not yet. Then he presented the documents, the ones I had found. It's the ones they had drafted, the notes from my medical record that had been taken out of context. He placed each one on the table like puzzle pieces. At first, she tried to deflect, said it was a misunderstanding, that they had only been exploring options in case something happened, that it was all preventative, nothing more. Mr. Rayburn let her speak, then gently asked if she had ever presented those documents to me for discussion or consent. She hesitated. That was enough. My son finally looked up. His voice was flat, his eyes tired. He said they had only wanted to protect me, that I was getting older, that I had started forgetting things, that sometimes I repeated myself or left the stove on. I said calmly that no one ever asked me if I wanted protection. That concern is not a license. That love does not give someone permission to quietly steal control. He started to push back, said they weren't trying to steal anything, said they had always supported me, so I opened my folder and took out a copy of the withdrawal from the Quiet Savings account, the one I hadn't touched in years. I slid it across the table. He didn't touch it. Then I took out the bank document, with his name listed as secondary account holder added without my knowledge. And finally, the draft petition for conservatorship, the one I had found tucked between scarves and forgotten warmth. Mr. Rayburn placed a final sheet on the table. The declaration we had filed, official, time-stamped, public. It was no longer a conversation. It was a record. They didn't speak for a while. The air in the room shifted, the way it does when someone realizes the performance is over and the curtain is down. I didn't look away. I let the silence stretch. Eventually, my son sighed and said, "I guess you've made up your mind." I said I hadn't needed to. The facts did that for me. She asked what I wanted, and for a moment, I let myself imagine all the things I could say. I want an apology. I want to be seen. I want to go back to when you still called me for no reason, when you didn't flinch at my presence, when your daughter-in-law didn't smile like I was something to be managed. But instead, I said this: I want you to understand that I was never confused. I was just quiet, and now I'm not. Mr. Rayburn closed the folder. The meeting ended not with shouting, not with closure, just a mutual understanding that something had changed permanently. They left without asking to hug me. I walked home and disploring, and I felt taller. I stood in my kitchen and made tea, the kind with dried orange peel and cinnamon that fills the room with warmth. I carried it to the back porch and sat in the sun with my shoulders loose and my chest open. I had one. Not loudly, not with revenge, but with the kind of dignity that doesn't need to be explained. With proof, with boundaries. With the slow, steady power of telling the truth. And not backing down. My life was mine again. Not because someone gave it back, because it never let it go. The house felt different now. Not bigger or smaller. It's just mine again. Fully. Without the invisible weight of plans being drawn behind my back. Without the quiet dread of wondering which drawer might hide another betrayal. The silence had changed too. It wasn't the hollow kind anymore, the kind that echoed through the halls like absence. It was peace, room to breathe, the space to choose. I spent the first few days after the meeting doing small things. Clearing out the linen closet, reorganizing the pantry, donating old coats I hadn't worn in years to the church thrift store. I didn't rush. I didn't need to. Every drawer I opened, every shelf I wiped down felt like a reclamation, not of the house, but of myself. I lit candles in the evening, sat by the window with the curtain half drawn, watched the world move without needing to explain my stillness to anyone. And then one morning, standing at the kitchen sink with my fingers dipped in warm dishwater, I realized something. I didn't want to stay. Not just in this house. In this version of my life, it wasn't anger. It wasn't revenge. It was clarity. This place, this porch, these rooms, they had served me well. They had held laughter, tears, birthdays, grief. But they had also become a kind of museum. A place where my son's height was still marked on the doorframe, where every corner whispered the name of a life I no longer wanted to sit quietly inside. I dried my hands and sat down with my notebook. Wrote a new list. This time, not tasks. Dreams travel alone at least once. Learn to sleep without. Checking the phone, find a smaller place with a wide sky. Cook for joy, not for anyone else. Wake up with purpose, not obligation that afternoon. I called Margaret and told her I was thinking of selling. There was a pause on the line. Not of judgment, of surprise, she said. Gosh, where will you go? Said, I don't know yet, but I'll know it when I see it. I contacted a realtor the next day. It's a kind woman named Sharon who wore simple gold hoops and had laugh lines that told me she understood time. I told her I wasn't in a rush, but I was ready. She walked through the house with reverence, said it was filled with stories. I nodded, but didn't tell her all of them. Some belonged only to me now. In the meantime, I visited a lot with wide windows just past the edge of town, a modest single story with a porch that faced east, and a fig tree growing in the back. Overgrown but determined. The backyard opened into a stretch of green I could walk barefoot through. No steps, no stairs. Just space. I bought it in cash. And when I signed the final papers, I didn't tell them. I packed slowly, box by box. I kept only what mattered. My mother's mixing bowl, the quilt Margaret gave me when my sister died, my notebooks, the blue scarf from the cedar chest. I left the rest for the new owners, a young couple expecting their first child. I left them a note tucked in the silverware. Drawer. May this home hold you gently. May you listen to each other. May no one here ever be erased. Moving day came and went without fanfare. No family gathering, no send-off. Just me and a small moving truck in a breeze that smelled faintly of mint. My new home was smaller, quieter, but it breathed with possibility. I planted herbs in the windowsill, bought a bird feeder and hung it near the fig tree. Signed up for a pottery class in town. The teacher's name was Alina, and she wore overalls dusted with clay. She called me Miss L and made me laugh without asking for my story. I didn't need to explain myself here. I was just a woman with her hands in the earth again, creating something new. One morning, I woke before the sun and stepped outside with my cup of tea. The grass was still damp, the sky a soft blur of violet and rose. I stood there barefoot, alone, and thought, this is what beginning again feels like. I wasn't lonely. I wasn't scared. I had taken back my name, my space, my story. The house I had left was just that. A house, not a shrine, not a battlefield. I didn't need to stand inside it anymore to prove I had survived it. I had taken the door off its hinges and walked into something better. In the weeks that followed, I made new routines. Not for structure, but for joy. Morning walks, evenings with music playing low in the background. Writing at the kitchen table with the window open and the fig leaves brushing the glass. Sometimes, I would see other women around town, women who looked like me, a little older, a little slower, carrying their own bags, their own stories, and sometimes we'd nod. Not in recognition, but in understanding. There are many of us women who have been quiet too long. Women who are told they're imagining things. Women who are gently, daily erased. But there are more of us now who are saying, softly but firmly, no. I'm still here. I wrote a final letter to my son. I didn't send it. I just folded it and placed it in the back of my notebook. It said, I loved you more than you'll ever understand, but I will not love you at the cost of myself anymore. You do not get to rewrite me while I am still alive. I hope one day you see what you did. And I hope if you ever come looking for me, you find a version of yourself that's worthy of the mother who raised you. Then I signed it and let it be. Because freedom isn't loud. Sometimes it's just a woman sitting barefoot in the grass, smiling at the sky she chose for herself. And nothing else needs to be said. I don't know exactly when the weight lifted. It wasn't one sharp breath or one big realization. It happened slowly, like dusk, softening into night. All I knew was that one morning I woke up and didn't feel afraid of the day. I didn't rehearse what I would say if someone doubted me. I didn't feel like I was bracing myself for another quiet blow. I just made tea, tied back my hair, and let the sunlight hit the floor without asking what it meant. The quiet here is different. Not hollow, not heavy. It's clean. It allows me to hear things again, birds in the fig tree, whine through the screen, the distant hum of a neighbor's lawnmower. Things I used to miss while spinning in the noise of trying to stay needed. It's strange how long we carry roles we've outgrown. How long we let ourselves be defined by how useful we are to others. I was mother, supporter, giver, listener, but rarely was I allowed to just be. Just exist without being someone else's reflection. Now, when I stand in front of the mirror, I see myself without the old stories layered over my skin. I see a woman with a soft jaw and silver hair. She no longer tries to die. I see eyes that have witnessed betrayal and still hold space for beauty. I see someone real, someone quiet, someone whole. The town has started to feel familiar. I know which shop carries the fresh lemons and which day the flower vendor sets up near the post office. I've made friends, not many, but enough. Women who've lived long enough to stop pretending. We meet on Thursdays for coffee, bring our own mugs, trade stories without trying to fix one another. One of them, Eileen, said something last week that stayed with me. She said there's a different kind of freedom that comes when you no longer need to be forgiven for choosing yourself. I went home that night and wrote it on a scrap of paper, taped it to the fridge, because that's what this has all been, a long return to self. Not revenge, not punishment, just a reclamation of everything I almost gave away. I think about my son sometimes, not with bitterness, not anymore. I wonder if he realizes what he did, if he sits in his house and feels the absence I used to fill. Or if he simply moved on, filing me away under difficult or aging or handled. I've let go of needing to know. That's part of the peace too, letting go of the questions that gnawed at me for years. Why didn't he call? Why didn't she smile with kindness? Why was I always something to be managed instead of cherished? Those answers live in them. I don't carry their shadows anymore. Instead, I've started carrying other things, a camera. For one, I bought it used from a woman at the farmer's market whose father had passed. It's nothing fancy, just a small silver thing with a strap that smells like old leather. But I bring it with me on walks, snap photos of clouds, leaves, cracked sidewalks, the kind of things no one notices unless they're finally paying attention. I've started writing again, too. Not letters to defend myself, not documentation for protection. Just thoughts, observations, memories that no longer hurt to hold. Sometimes I write stories, small ones. A woman planting a garden on a rooftop, another taking a train to a town where no one knows her name. None of them are me. Exactly. But all of them are pieces I once lost. And here's the quiet truth I've found in this new chapter. You don't need everyone. To understand your worth, you only need to remember it yourself. There's no plaque for what I've endured. No parade. No one claps for a woman who saves herself silently. But I don't need that anymore. The victory is in the quiet, in knowing I didn't let them erase me, in walking through a home that is mine, not just by deed, but by choice, in making dinner for one and setting the table anyway with a napkin and a glass of water and the good fork, because I deserve a place I set for myself. I used to dread birthdays. It felt like reminders of how small my world had become, how many people had stepped away while I kept hoping they'd return. But this year, I'd bought myself a cake, a small one, vanilla with lemon frosting. I ate a slice on the porch with the breeze brushing past, bird hopping along the railing, like it knew the day was meant to be marked. And I felt full, not just from sugar, from enough-ness, from being exactly where I am, with no apologies left to give. People think starting over means stripping your life bare, but it doesn't have to. Sometimes it just means choosing peace over proximity. Sometimes it means locking the door not out of anger, but out of mercy for your own heart. And that's what I've done. Not to punish, not to wound, but to protect the part of me that took so long to come home. The fig tree is blooming now. It's tiny green buds, stubborn and soft. It's not the prettiest tree, but it grows toward the sun, even when the sky's uncertain. I like to think I'm a bit like that now. Still standing, still reaching, still mine. And always, finally, free. Sometimes I sit by the window just before dusk, watching the light stretch thin across the floor, and I think about all the lives I've lived within this one. The girl who walked out of school at 17 with trembling hands and a quiet resolve. The young mother who learned to hold grief and love in the same arms. The woman who scrubbed other people's kitchens with her back aching and her heart full of names no one else remembered. The mother who was told she was too much. The woman who was treated as if she were already fading. And now, this version of me still standing sovereign. This chapter feels like a kind of exhale. Not the end of something, but the settling of it. The truth has stopped shifting under me. I no longer question what I saw, what I heard, what I knew deep in my bones before the paper trail ever confirmed it. I believed myself. That was the hardest part. And now I live softly, not hidden, not diminished, just whole. I've painted the hallway in my new home a warm, sandy gold. Hung up photos that mean something only to me. My sister in her corduroy jacket, Margaret holding a baby on her hip in front of the old swing set. A Polaroid of me from the 80s where I'm laughing so hard you can see all my teeth. I look at that photo now and don't mourn her. I just nod at her. She did what she had to. So have I. I've written a new will. It's clean, clear, honest. I left something for the library, something for the local women's shelter. The rest goes to the people who held my name with care when I thought I had no one left. The ones who showed up not out of blood, but out of choice. He's not in it, not to be cruel, but because inheritance should reflect trust, not obligation, and trust was the thing he broke quietly, with words dressed as worry. With papers drafted in the dark, with the assumption that I wouldn't notice, but I did, and I remembered. And I chose not to forget myself in the process. The truth is, I still love him. In the way that a mother never fully stops loving the first person she ever held more fiercely than herself. But that love now lives in its own room, separate from the rest of me. It doesn't get to steer. It doesn't get to speak over my needs. If he ever finds his way to my door again, won't slam it, but I won't swing it wide open either. There are things that need to be earned, and he hasn't asked to. I've stopped watching the phone, stopped rehearsing what I'd say if they called. I used to carry imaginary conversations around like stones in my coat pockets. Now I let them drop. One by one, my life is quiet. My days small, but they are mine. I walk every morning, even when my knees complain. The neighbors wave. The air smells like dry earth and pine needles. I wave back and keep walking. I cook small meals. It's just enough. I light candles when I eat, not for anyone else, just because I like the flicker. I read novels in the bathtub. I hum to myself without realizing. I don't fold the laundry right away, and I don't apologize for it. The world didn't end when I chose myself. In fact, it opened. One of the women from pottery class asked me last week what my story was, how I ended up here. On this street, in this town, living alone with a fig tree and a porch swing. I told her I lost everything that didn't see me, and what remained was everything I needed. She smiled and nodded, said, "Me too. We are out here, all of us. Quiet women, strong women. Women who've been misnamed, misread, misunderstood, but not erased. Not anymore." There's a small wooden box on my bedside. Table now. Inside it are a few things that mean the most. A ribbon from the baby blanket I crocheted, the first check from selling my old house, and the notebook I carried through all of it. The final page is blank, not because there's nothing more to say, but because I get to decide what comes next. And I will dot in my time in my voice without anyone signing for me, without anyone watching from the shadows. I am no longer proving anything. I am simply living, and I have never felt so free. Now, I'm curious about you. Have you ever experienced something like this? Let me know in the comments. And if you've stayed with me until now, thank you. I'll leave you with two other stories I think you'll love.